Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad, joined by three remarkable human beings today. Jenan Matari. I have been pronouncing it Matari. I apologize. I heard you, Jenan, the other day in one of your speeches say Matari, which is
That was
something I
just
should
for you.
know.
I did that so
I
that
am
you
I
saw
am so sorry. I've been saying Matari for like four episodes.
it.
Um, and who is my co-host, my regular co-host. I'm her co-host as well as Noura Erakat, our frequent guest host, who will be joining us every now and then. And our guest today, our special feature today, is the formidable Sherene Seikaly, whom I will introduce in just a few minutes. This is Gaza on My Mind, Gaza ala Bali, episode 5 on Palestinian life despite genocide, ethnic cleansing, military occupation, and apartheid rule, and we can go on and on. And it basically addresses the resilience of Palestinians in Gaza, from whom we draw courage, inspiration, and life lessons that I think only they can impart on all of us today. As with other iterations of the series, of which this is the fifth episode, we will reflect, mourn, strategize, and rise up together. A quick word about why we're doing this series of conversations. Essentially, after 8 months of Israeli genocidal campaign in Gaza, there is this expectation that those of us who are advocating for Palestinian freedom will go away, especially as Gaza coverage is gradually relegated to optional news. It's something that we actually have been researching, and it turns out that out of most mainstream news channels, audio, visual, and textual, are no longer featuring Gaza as a main part of the front section unless something really significant in their eyes is taking place. This program is essentially saying we are not going anywhere. The conversation about Gaza must continue. We will keep Gaza right, front, and center on the daily and weekly. Every week, we'll be hosting a freeform engagement like this one on all things Gaza. We also want to thank the artist Nidal Khairi for the illustration that adorns our announcement, in which Israel's collective starvation campaign of Palestinians is on display. A close up of the illustration reveals Palestinian faces within the skeleton in Nidal's tradition of aesthetic representation. Yes, it's morbid, but also encapsulates the horrendous genocidal campaign by Israel, the campaign of starvation, which is emblematic. On to our speakers. I would like to introduce Jenan Matari, who is a two-time award-winning Palestinian storyteller and producer, and I am not joking. She is so busy, we still have not received her full bio. At one point, we're going to have it, and I wonder what we're going to find there. So, Jinan, I'm outing you again. We're also joined by Noura Erakat, a human rights attorney and assistant professor at Rutgers University, or associate professor at Rutgers University, New
Listen, the
Brunswick.
Bassam of all people to get that wrong.
Yani, we asked you for the updated bio. Associate professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, Department of Africana Studies. Her research interests include humanitarian law, refugee law, national security law, and critical race theory. Noura is author of Justice for Some, Law as Politics in the Question of Palestine, Stanford University Press, and she is co-founding editor of Jadaliyya and an editorial committee member of the Journal of Palestine Studies. I'll stop here. People can read the rest of the bio online, and we will just go to Jinan, and then in just a few minutes we will bring in Sherene. So this is about um, life, affirming life despite genocide. So it encompasses a wide array of topics. So it's almost an open episode on Gaza and the genocide taking place there. Jinan, the floor is yours to get us rolling.
So every episode we start off by essentially stating our intentions for the discussion to come. As you mentioned in the beginning, Bassem, the purpose of this is to keep Gaza at top of mind and a part of the conversation. And so our hope is that as we discuss the topics that come up today, that we always remember to center Gaza through all of it. Um, I think that this is such an important topic, the Palestinian life despite genocide, because for a very long time, at least in my personal experience, when I first became a content creator about Palestinian identity, a big part of my goal was to teach people about Palestinian life and culture and tradition in a way that they could appreciate it, that was kind of admittedly disassociated from the destruction and devastation that we experience. And I've obviously learned over the last couple of years that for as much as I wish I could only show people the beauty of being Palestinian and Palestinian existence, it is not possible to disassociate the two from one another. And for as horrible as our reality is to survive through all of this, it's also worth noting and appreciating and admiring and talking about how much we have been able to survive through. And so I think it's really important, especially for allies who want to be, appropriate allies for the Palestinian cause, to learn to not just support Palestinians in our despair and through our struggle, but also support us in our success and learn how to support the community in ways that help us build economies, that help us build stronger communities, that celebrate us as a people, simultaneously while they're also taking part in our fight for liberation. So I think it's a really, really important topic. I'm excited to hear what Sherene has to say. Always excited to hear what Noura has to say. And I'm looking forward to it.
I'd just like to comment here and add, just to lift up and affirm what you're saying, Jeanine. I think so much of the way that folks have understood Palestine has been through a politics of almost pity and sympathy, right? Which is something that we've critiqued in this moment, to not only stand with Palestinians when we're victims, but to stand with Palestinians when we're resisting and fighting for our lives. So in echoance not only of life despite genocide, but also in what form do Palestinians become palatable to those who identify as allies in a struggle against genocide and in a struggle for Palestinian freedom. Very similarly, Gaza, despite 17 years of siege, a necropolitical regime, a program of slow death, that really set up an expectations that Palestinians were supposed to die quietly on a limited caloric intake and inability. Even they're a people. Palestinians in Gaza are people who live by the sea. These are fisher people who have access to the vastness of the sea, who have been not delimited from being able to sustain their own lives because of this necropolitical regime. And despite these limitations, also have a tremendous amount of life to share. I think around Ramadan, especially, I enjoyed videos of, and stories of folks in the market celebrating, breaking fast. And even now, in the midst of this, in the camps, watching and bearing witness to other Palestinian cultural workers who have engaged in music with young people, in debke, in this this commitment to life despite all the destruction around them, which is probably, if anyone's like me in moments of deep despair, been a source of, okay, chin up, right? And this is why we fight. We pray for the dead and fight for the living like hell. So I'm glad to be a part of this, to lift that up.
I love that you said that. Sorry, Bassam, before we move on, I just that's been such a big Zionist talking point, specifically since October, when Palestinians are sharing all that they have lost in Gaza throughout this most recent, fast-paced genocide. They look at these Palestinians in Gaza, some of whom lived absolutely beautiful lives and beautiful homes, and some of them had nice cars, and they say things like, well, if they were really under siege and if they were really oppressed, like, how can you call Gaza an open air prison when this is what their lifestyle was? Like, exactly what you said, as if we were just supposed to be miserable and poor and just like dying slowly, and we weren't afforded or allowed to have any type of beauty. And I think that that's a perfect example of life despite genocide, life despite siege, despite occupation, despite apartheid, is that Palestinians make every situation, they find a way to make every situation as beautiful as possible to live this life. We are just engineers of life. So I'm glad that you said that, because I hear that a lot. Like, it's still happening. In October, it was a really big talking point. It's starting to come back now because every once in a while, Palestine will take over the news again, and people will dispel the historical context that we give of Gaza and how we got to where we are today by saying things like, oh, well, if it was really an open air prison, how do you explain these photos of this beautiful life that they lived?
Absolutely. I'll refrain from saying much right now because I would like to bring in Sherene to the conversation. أهلا وسهلا Sherene.
Hi, glad to be here.
كيفك؟
تمام.
كويس. Sherene, I just like Jenan, well, kind of not just like Jenan because she didn't give me a bio, although her accomplishments are ahead of her, and Noura. Sherene's bio is incredible. I'm not gonna read much of it or all of it. So let me just say that Sherene is associate professor of history at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She held the Qatar postdoctoral fellowship at Georgetown University and the Europe in the Middle East postdoctoral fellowship at the, no way I can pronounce this, especially that it's German, and I'm not, really hot about Germany right now. Wissenschaftliche ZU Berlin. Double Halik Shereen, if you can tell us what that is. Seikaly, or Shereen, was director of the Middle East Studies Center at the American University in Cairo, 2012-2014, where she was awarded an Excellence in Teaching Award. Shereen's Men of Capital, Scarcity and Economy in Mandate Palestine out of Stanford University Press explores how Palestinian capitalists and British colonial officials used economy to shape territory, nationalism, the home, and the body. Her forthcoming book, From Baltimore to Beirut, on the question of Palestine, focuses on a Palestinian man who was at once a colonial officer and a colonized subject, an enslaver and a refugee. I will let Shereen share more about this upcoming work, which so many of us are aware of at this point. But the floor is yours, Shereen, and welcome to Gaza على بالي.
Thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be with you all, and I'm really glad that we're centering Palestinian life. I think that for me, one of the main challenges has actually been to insist on life, both in the discursive realm as it is on the ground materially. And one of the things that troubles me the most is the way that in sort of well-meaning discussions, people will say, "Oh, look at all the future militants that you're creating," right? And in this sense, I think really kind of setting up an inevitability of the death drive, a death drive that actually we're not part of. And for me, what's been incredibly moving has been to see all of the multiple ways that Palestinians hold on to life. Palestinians in Gaza hold on to life even amidst death. And I've been particularly thinking a lot and moved by the labor of children in this time. And because I've been this quarter, we're on a 10-week system at the UC, and this quarter I taught a class on history, historiography, and the archive, and a lot of the work was it wound up doing comparative genocides in many ways. And we just finished studying Guatemala and the genocide of the Maya peoples there. And I was struck at each turn that we would study different genocides to see the specific and inordinate targeting of children in particular. And I think that in itself is reflects the deep ways that the adversary understands the future of the peoples it's attempting to annihilate as the main threat. And so in some ways, I think that insisting on life is one of the most important, crucial things that we have to do strategically.
Can I point out, just Sherene, picking up from what you're saying, Number one, obviously, this constant emphasis on children, which, especially for the naysayers that want to tell us that this is somehow a war and just a gruesome war as opposed to a genocide, this emphasis, this is 50% of the population is children. It's a war on children, right? It's a war on the possibility of life. The fact that now famine, which has already been inflicted, will stunt them. And some 365,000 children are already subject to stunting. So even with life in the corporal sense, without an incredible amount of intervention, will not be able to develop, right? That this is definitely that dimension. But this other piece that you emphasized for us at the top, that even with amongst those who are in alignment on the question of genocide and the non-negotiability of Palestinian liberation, will often look to the conditions that have been inflicted to even read our own children, our babies, as that this is their future. What are they going to be in the future? But fighters in a way that's not, I agree with you. Like, reading this is not just about what they mean in this broader question of fighting and ongoing conflict and instability, but what does it mean for them? What does it mean for their families? What does it mean for us as a broader, in our Palestinian kinship, for our children to be suffering so much and not just read them within this rubric, this rubric of policy. So thank you for emphasizing that.
I think it's also important that as people look towards specifically our people in Gaza for inspiration, that it doesn't become some, and I don't know any other term other than this, so sorry if it's crass, but it doesn't become some sort of inspiration porn to them. Like, they need to be able to see us as humans who are in deep suffering and not use it as a way to like make themselves feel better about their own lives, and not look at us and say, well, if they can get through that, I can get through this like small little thing. Like, we have to consistently humanize ourselves, and that's a really exhausting part about being Palestinian, is that we have to make sure that we're not being dehumanized in like the terrorist sense, right? But like also that people don't just look at our suffering and find it like, I'm going to say something that's probably going to not make so many people happy, but like, there's a mass conversion happening right now, which is wonderful. I think it's amazing that people are finding faith in God, but I don't want my people to have to die in high definition on a live screen for someone to feel a connection to something because they're inspired by Palestinians' faith, right? There's a sense of resiliency in Palestinian identity itself outside of whatever faith the Palestinian is. But so there's just a lot of ways that people are looking at Palestinians for inspiration, when we really need to find it in ourselves, so that we can be good for them in the diaspora, and allies can be good allies for our people, where they don't have to see this constant state of suffering to be inspired to take part in the cause. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would add that I try to really push for us to reject the kind of labor of humanization, and to reject the language of humanization and dehumanization. I think that that is a trap. And I think that we have to at each turn really step away from that evidencing, even though we're put in that corner all the time. I think that, I guess how I see it is also that, all of these people who are telling the story, whether it's the journalists or the hakawatis, or the people who are interviewed, or the people who are doing all of these kinds of creative ways to communicate their stories, those people are, in a way, the people that we follow, and they model what it might mean to live amidst death. And I agree with you, Nuda, that what we're talking about, for me, I pray every night that there's a ceasefire, and I'm also terrified for what will be unearthed once the bombing ends. And this is such a long term crisis, a long term. The consequences of this genocide we will live with forever, and they are coming on the heels of 17 years of blockade, where what I mean, we know that the kind of effect of malnutrition on children's cognitive and physical development is, you can't get past it, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think this is a moment where we kind of attempt to reject those binaries, and we say, we're not going to stand here and humanize ourselves. And we even reject the language of dehumanization. We will not be evicted from the category of the human. And what's moving to me when you watch people making life in the Gaza Strip now is that refusal of the eviction from the category of the human.
I don't know if we can pull them up. I mean, um, you, thanks be for social media as well as Al Jazeera really on displaying these images to us. But right, thinking about Auni Farhat, who is since evacuated, who was basically using clown work in order to engage children. A young woman who has literally set up a chalkboard in order to create a classroom. Others who have continued to show us how meals are made even with pots and pans found in the remains of a demolished home. I mean, this insistence, the moment that Palestinians went on, in a moment of just some sensible quiet, went onto a beach and filled the beach in this moment of life. And if you remember, the Israeli public was infuriated by this image, infuriated that they almost took offense that Palestinians would be finding life, and they wanted to hit back with greater vengeance. So, not only to refuse this discourse of dehumanization, as you caution us, Shireen, but also to insist on it's not our humanity that's been at stake.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
never been our humanity. It's
Exactly.
but when we're being watched, alive and living and insisting upon life, the fury of those who want to then have revenge, that's the humanity I question. And if it even existed. Yeah. Can I read something that I read this morning that was really, just the scope of kind of the realm of where we've been? Just from a Palestinian journalist, Hussam Shabbat. If I can just, lift that up. I don't know, Bassam, what are possibilities? I know I'm co-hosting, and yet I don't know the possibilities of screenshotting these things and having them up. And perhaps we can do that in real time. But Hussam tweeted, the last time I saw my mother was almost 8 months ago. I decided to stay in the north to keep covering the news while my family evacuated to the south. My mother left a 21-year-old eager to be a journalist, full of life. Little did I know that in those 8 months, I would age 100 years. I would not only be covering the news, but also digging mass graves, picking up decomposed bodies off the street, going through starvation, and trying to console parents over their dead kids. Every day is a hunt for survival. I'm not who I was 8 months ago, and I will never be the same. Um, just this capturing of the complexity of what it means, in this moment. And although I nowhere near to, to relate to this, the thing that I think we can all relate to is that none of us are ever going to be the same after this moment. Who can be the same after a genocide that's been supported through the collusion of Western imperial powers? As we say, "Aini ainak," like it's right in front of us. They're not even trying to hide this. Yeah, I just wanted to lift that up for us.
I wanted to interject just a little bit to ask a question about the question of life, Palestinian life, as well as the question of how we do not need to humanize Palestinians in order to make the charges and the statements and have the positions we have. My question is, when is it productive to do that, and when is it not productive? Because I can't imagine that we are saying that um, we shouldn't worry about that, given the realities of politics of life, especially if those of us here, four of us, live in the United States. For instance, one thing that I was always against, which goes against the spirit of my question, and I actually in a press conference I shared it, and I think we played it in the first episode. I was addressing how during the raid and violence, the brutal violence that was dealt to the encampments as being anti-Semitic, violent, terroristic, and so on, so many people were responding by saying that these encampments themselves included a Jewish contingency, a lot of Jews who were either part of the movement or in part led the movement or literally led that particular movement in various locales. And what I was saying, that we don't need to keep repeating this every single time as though we are humanized when we actually mention that these encampments included others, namely Jews, because of the charge of anti-Semitism and so on. And to humanize ourselves, we have to say that we are accompanied by others who are actually human in the view of, say, the dominant discourse or discourse of power and so on. So, so I understand that position, and I actually personally I'm very steadfast in affirming principles irrespective of discursive context. So my question to you all, especially Shereen, how would you toggle? How do we toggle between the two, given where we are living, where, for instance, we are all subject to these charges and potentially soon legal action just for critiquing the policies, the genocidal policies of a state. So that's kind of like a strategic discursive question, more so in my view than just a moral principle type of question.
I guess I'm trying to say that we reject the formula. That, and what we do is uplift the stories. So that, like the story that Noura just shared, like all the stories that we share, right? So this is what we've learned from, all of the people whose shoulders we stand on. Here I'm thinking of, the scholar of Palestinians in Lebanon who taught us how to do oral history, um, Rosemary Sayegh, right? Who actually showed us the ways that storytelling itself is the way that people make sense of catastrophe, is the way that actually they live despite catastrophe, because it is through storytelling that you are not just narrating the past, but giving people tools to understand the present and imagine the future. And this is the case across many different kinds of experiences. So again, here the question of Guatemala, or the experience of Guatemala, or the experience of the Atlantic world. This is something that the Black feminist theory has taught us for a long time, that it's really through storytelling that we can survive catastrophe. And in that sense, I'm suggesting um, to try and move away as much as we can from the evidentiary process, from evidencing that we are human, to reject that formula and to instead tell the stories that we are, that we emanate from, that make us possible. And in that way, for example, to get back to the encampment, to lift up the long tradition of Jewish anti-Zionism as part of our own formation, as part and parcel of the movement for Palestinian liberation. And in that sense, I think um, it's just it's a slightly different move. You see what I mean? It's not that we're not going to relay the stories, or it's not that we're not going to condemn the fact that on one end of a partition, parched and wounded border, there are people who are starving because of a man-made famine, and on the other end are settlers who are destroying trucks full of food and throwing them out onto the street, and having, at one point there was a group of people who had like a cotton candy and a celebration at checkpoint, because they were succeeding in not letting food go through. I'm not saying we don't tell those stories. I'm saying we continue to uplift those stories, but we do them that in a way that rejects the formula that I'm out here proving that we are actually human, or that we are actually the perfect victim, because we're not interested in that. First of all, there is no perfect victim. And second of all, that's not why it matters, right?
Yep.
Not yet. And just I like that formulation. Shireen, can you say it for us again? It's refusal of the equation? No. Something similar to
Yeah,
that.
it's a
The
refusal.
formula.
It's a refusal of the formula.
Formula.
And,
I
so
think,
sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, if I got the chance before. Oh, did I freeze? It looks like I froze, but I'm still talking. Okay. I was just gonna say, I just shared in the chat the most recent editor's note of the Journal of Palestine Studies, and I want to share a story that I end that note with, because it really moved me. It's a story of a father named Ahmed Imtiaz, who went out to the Nabulsi roundabout the day of the Flower Massacre. And, that hour when the Israelis killed 151 people. And he just crouched on the floor and he slid. And he held tightly to these like 4 cans of fava beans, and a chicken. And he could feel all of the and hear all of the bullets raining down on him, and he just held on to the food and kept crawling until he no longer heard any bullets, before he could stand up and move. And when a journalist, this was reported in Mondo Eyes, when a journalist asked him, was it worth it? He said, yes, of course, for my hungry children. Of course it's worth it. And I think it's that kind of, those, I think Jenan was saying, resilience. And I think, sometimes,
Rosemary Sayegh has, shared a storytelling.
Shireen, Noura,
Yes.
I apologize. I think when we went to the screen sharing, we missed the last 30 seconds of your the summary, Shireen. If you can repeat that, I would really appreciate it, because I heard it. I'm not sure if it was broadcast.
um, so I was saying, if you imagine, the story that I was telling was about this man who basically was crawling for his life while all these bullets were raining down on him in the midst of the flower massacre, holding on to 4 cans of food or fava beans and a chicken. And I was just trying to say that telling that story, and in the tradition of storytelling, what we're lifting up isn't to say, oh, look, we're human too. We're not terrorists, or we're not, whatever it is that the formula is trying to disprove. that actually what that story is doing is showing us what we have to learn from this father.
And then I was emphasizing and lifting up the Shirene's lesson on, or highlighting of Rosemary Sayeg's work, and tradition of storytelling also as method, and what that means for us, for ourselves. I just want to, lift up a couple of things, especially when it comes to this access to food. Last night at Rutgers, we had an event for the UN Special Rapporteur to Food, Michael Fakhri, whose presentation to the UN General Assembly in this fall will be about starvation, and not merely, and he distinguishes starvation from the right to food, right?
Mm.
And then also from food sovereignty, which is an entirely different framework of the ability to be able to feed oneself. And he did this beautiful thing of offering that freedom will be, how do we know that we're free, is when we're able to feed one another, and be in communion. The reason that I share this with him is because just thinking about, how Palestinians have, against all odds, right, held on to the chicken and fava beans, and basically, um, survived through sniper attack at a hospital, and bombardment to feed their family, but that this has also featured children who have been killed under airdrops, and other fathers who have drowned in going out to sea to get those airdrops. We've seen something like 12 flower massacres that have been documented, um, and now in a condition where, according to Michael, that in his estimation, more people will actually die from this famine in the future, even after the ceasefire, than have died from bullets and bombs.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he raised, which I had never even thought of, and so it was stunning for me, that I want to share, is that one of the most traumatic dimensions of starvation is the shame that's associated with survival, and not just surviving, but also that because you're enduring famine, you're often forced to choose who gets to eat what, who
Yeah.
gets to eat first, who doesn't get to eat. And he lifts up, and he's done, all of this is based on interviews with Palestinians in Gaza as well, to his credit, but also what it means when a neighbor comes to ask for food and you can't,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, share. And if somebody doesn't survive in their household, you remain neighbors. And there's that shame and the trauma of that shame that also goes into account. I mean, beyond the biopolitical is this, dimension of the emotional. And these stories that must be told, that are being told right now, um, that really pierce through, I think, one of the worst parts of coverage on what's happening, which is like the geopolitical dimension. Did Netanyahu accept the ceasefire proposal? Will there be war on Lebanon? What's happening? What is the role of Qatar and Egypt? Right? There's this conversation that happens that trumps, these other stories that are taking place. And I think part of the work of knowledge producers, right, editors in chief of the Journal of Palestine Studies like Sherene, content creators like Jenan, um, and organizers who bring us together like Bassam, is to be able to provide those other stories as well, and to help lift them up.
And if I could just add one thing, which is that I think one thing for us to keep in mind is that we have a long tradition of this. While the year, it's not a moment, it's a never ending eternity.
Mm.
This genocide that we're in, while it's redefining the depth and breadth of the ongoing Nakba, we do have now a 75-year tradition of narrating catastrophe. And I think that we are now we have different kinds of tools to do that, and we can look within the Palestinian tradition to think about those tools. And I want to lift up for a second um, Rabia Ighbariyi here, who has been for many months now struggling to publish a piece on thinking about Nakba as a legal category, as an analytic. And I think, I'll let Nuda say more about the way that that piece has been repetitively censored. But the point that I want to end with here that links, Ahmed Imtiaz and his fava beans and his chicken to Rabia Aghbari putting out Nakba as an analytical category is to see the ways that Palestinians, with all of the how threatening we are to forces so much stronger than us.
Mm.
And I think that fear, while I think, I don't remember in what context I was in, and I was saying this, and people kind of understood me as saying it as a point of despair, but it's not. I think that there's something there about the kind of deep fear that living instills, that putting out an analysis instills, that we have to think a little bit more about.
I'll speak to it a little bit, Shireen. I was with Rabia last night and the day before when this was happening. One, to affirm what you're saying, that, what fear we instill, the audacity, right? The audacity that we wouldn't be grateful for not being harmed and somehow subscribe to a politics of empire, but instead continue to refuse it. I mean, for Rabia, who also, is from 48. And so that what's the word, that disdain for him is even higher, right? And so, he produces a piece where he wants to offer that we not be read through a politics. He's a legal scholar now, practicing attorney in Palestine for many years, and is now pursuing his PhD at Harvard Law School. And so is insisting on shifting away from a politics of analogy to understand ourselves, through law, which is all analogy and precedent, but away from apartheid and genocide. What happens when we theorize Nekba as a legal concept, and Nekba as being constitutive of foundational elements and other features, so that he says for us that if genocide is a feature of destruction, that Nekba, the main feature of it, is the usurpation of our self-determination. And he offers this in the Harvard Law Review first as a blog post that was solicited, that they end up censoring, that the editor-in-chief ends up censoring. And so he has to,
M-
despite
m-
the
m-
majority of the board.
more than censoring, right? They took down the whole.
No, this is before.
Oh,
This
That's
that's
is
the
in
before.
most
the
recent one. Yeah.
fall. They took down
Oh,
the whole article, and he ends up publishing it in The Nation. Then 23 out of 40 editors at Columbia Law Review, right, solicit the piece from him as a full article. He ends up, churning that 2,000 word piece into 106 pages of scholarship that they publish. So now it's up. They've got the, screenshots. It's up. It's published. And then the board of directors, because Columbia Law Review, unlike other law reviews, actually functions like an NGO, so that they have a board. And then the student editors function as more like the staff. The board of editors is so enraged that they want to take down the piece. The Columbia Law Review refuses to take down the piece, the staff. So the board shuts down the entire website. Yeah, the deep, fragility, settler anxiety, fragility, in a way that emphasizes the threat of our existence by merely refusing our refusal to disappear and to be. I want to.
I'm gonna Noura, I'm gonna step in here and just play a couple of just so you can have a bit of a break,
Exactly
play a
what I was
couple of
going
the
to ask. Okay.
videos that you guys have shared. Although I'm not gonna yell at anyone for not sharing them with me before the feed, because I'm hosting, producing, speaking, and so on. So it's a little overwhelming. So I'm gonna go to it now. This is, if you can, do you want to set it up before I play it?
Jenan, I
Which
think
one?
maybe
Yeah. Which one? Which link?
It's on. It's Oh, wait a minute. Right.
Yes. So for some reason yesterday, my algorithm was all about Ghazawis and their love of animals, and how despite them not having food and water for themselves and, safe shelter for themselves, they're doing their best to take care of Gaza's animals. And I quickly became a big fan of this person's page, Fadl. He just goes around Gaza and he takes care of injured animals. And he put out this video last week when the weather was getting really hot, just like urging everyone in Gaza, but also around the world, to like not forget to put water out for our furry four-legged. So.
All right, I'll play it.
عامل حفلة صدقية.
That's it. His whole page is just of him caring for animals. I think he was a vet pre-genocide. So he's consistently going around and, giving medicine to animals who need it. He's taking care of their injuries. I guess this next one that you're playing is the coffee video. This one came out yesterday from the Gaza Sunbirds. And again, to the resiliency and the engineering that is Palestinian life. They figured out a way to make coffee and create like a consistent fire for their coffee pots with Purell and cotton balls, and just lighting it on fire so it continues to burn. And everybody's able to enjoy coffee.
And there's one more.
This was what Noura was talking about earlier, about people finding any which way they can to keep the children's spirits up. No matter how much pain they're in themselves, they're finding a way to make these children laugh and smile, and that's just the heart and soul of Palestinians, but specifically Palestinians in Gaza. So it's nice to see these things despite all that's happening.
And there are also many videos from prior developments and bombings and responses that actually show such resilience, which, when compared with the kind of problems, of course, that some of us have on a daily basis, just puts things in perspective in extremely empowering ways. All right.
This is also the epitome of that quote that, Palestinians, we teach life. All of these videos that we just showed are ways that Palestinians continue to teach and spread life despite our circumstances. Wherever we may be in the world, if it's not in Palestine, we find ways to bring joy to not just ourselves, but to those around us. Joy is known to extend one's life in the physical world. And so I think we've just been getting incredible representation of that quote from our brothers and sisters in Gaza.
Sherene,
Can
you
I,
said, yeah,
before we go to the next video, I just want to lift up
we
Rafik
are
Ziad.
sorry, we are in the next video. I'm sorry, because Sherene just sent it to me. Do you want to set it up or say something about this, Sherene?
Oh, this is the this is the spontaneous classroom that Noura was mentioning earlier, and this is to I think Noura wanted to lift up Rafik Ziadeh, who was the poetess behind the We Teach Life, and I think to what Jenan was saying, just also the way that education is always so central and important to Palestinian refugee resilience. And this is something, again, we've seen across these 75 years of people making sure to create classrooms, even amidst genocide and Nakba.
All right. All right. Thank you, Shalini. Noura, you were saying.
Thank you, Shireen. You heard me. I was lifting up Rafif Ziadeh, who offers us the poem of We Teach Life, and she does it precisely in response to this formula that we should be rejecting, because the idea, there's so much of this is racist. Yes, we are rejecting the formula of dehumanization, but the entire edifice upon which this genocide is possible, now we're on day 241, days with advanced weapons, live streamed, high definition, as you say, Jenan, and the acceptance of it, right? More or less, not by the people, but by, the intransigence of these imperial powers, is predicated on racial frameworks that are all tantamount to the thorough dehumanization of Palestinians, who are basically framed as not inhabiting a normal life to which they are entitled and now must return to, right? And so, this isn't, these are all the tropes, like Golda Meir, who I don't, just lifting up these tropes that we know, but just naming. I hate that they, this idea of like, I hate that they make us kill their children, or others like Senator Barbara Boxer, who in 2001, in the course of the Al-Aqsa Intifada, or what's known as the Al-Aqsa Intifada, says that Palestinian mothers have babies to send them out to kill Israelis. That transforming our entire existence into a security threat and into a way that makes us self-absorbed. Israelis Zionists are incredibly that self-absorbed that our entire existence is about them. They did this when my cousin was killed on his sister's wedding day, shot 6 times above the waist in 2 seconds, when he was traveling to basically get a car decorated for his sister, traveling from Abu Dis to another Palestinian village, Bethlehem. And the whole framework is that this was a terrorist operation, and he was car ramming a kiosk. What was so deeply infuriating to me, right, is this assumption that Ahmad, may he rest in peace and power, whose body is still held in captivity, his corpse is still held as hostage in captivity, right? Speaking of savagery, that the assumption and the trope that he somehow hates Israel more than he loves his sister and his mother on the day of his sister's wedding, right? That they couldn't, like, in no realm, even if there was ever an ambition of his, right? He would never do it on his sister's wedding day, would never break his mother's heart like that. And yet, that being a primary assumption, at the heart of this racializing framework. Anyway, that this is longstanding, and Rafif's work as a poet and the work of our literary cultural workers and our poets and poetesses and authors and writers and artists have all been, part of this legacy, that have led us to this moment as well, just to lift that up.
All right. I'm sure you all have seen this, which goes along with the next set of questions that I'd like to ask. This is the interview with a settler par excellence on the transfer that is um, being addressed openly by this person who's a very interesting. Oh, you guys, hang on.
Maybe
Sorry,
Bassam, not for nothing, if I can be the one.
hang on one
We don't
second.
we don't we don't we don't platform a
W-
settler. Can we just not do
I
that?
understand. I understand. I'm trying. Something went wrong. I apologize. So besides this note, I'd like to share just a couple of pieces of development that we are all, of course, aware of. In the past few days, there were many reports on the question. We do this like towards the end. I know that people are now going to people like you know, Sherene. I know that she has to move to the next thing. Israel dropped 70,000 tons of bombs on Gaza in just 6 months, which supersedes some of the worst bombing campaigns in World War II, including the combined bombing of Dresden, which early on people were saying it's approaching. Dresden, Hamburg, and London combined, and this is just in 6 months. We also have this section or this interview about transfer. We also have the Ben Gvir's national security minister, who just stated that it's time for all of Lebanon to burn, as well as Israeli minister um, Smotrich threatening to turn the West Bank into ruins. And this simply, these are words, but the actual violence and killing and aggression, most recently in Al Aqsa, speaks of maybe what's to come, given that any kind of cessation of violence on part of Israel will open the door to accountability, whether we're cynical or not about this. The cessation of hostilities is going to actually bring um, a reckoning of sorts. And of course, the US Congress, the last bit I want to share before we move on or ask you to comment on them, or simply address what you'd like to address, is the US Congress passing a landmark bill to sanction the ICC for pursuing the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. I mean, each of these pieces of news is literally unbelievable as something that is happening as we speak about this topic.
I mean, I'll just say one thing about the about the bill in the House, in the Congress, which is that I think a lot of us think about the history of Palestine as a place to trace the emergence of U.S. hegemony, and I think it will also be a place that allows us to understand its erosion. And I think that's what we're watching. And I think Gaza has been a place where over 40,000 Palestinians have been brutally killed to as and the numbers are going to be much more when the fire finally ends, and as Noura was reminding us, when the consequences of a man-made starvation are going to that we're going to have to see what that actually looks like for the months and years to come. I think what's also died in Gaza is US hegemony. I think what's also died in Gaza are the claims to the already dead and attenuating claims to Western civilization. I think what's also died in Gaza are the ways that the quote unquote great powers have used international law as a blanket for conducting the most cynical and brutal machinations of their self-interest. So much has died in Gaza, and it's going to have many consequences for how people live and understand power and justice in the years to come.
Shireen, you said this in a tone that says we should wrap up, and
I'm
Jinan is
sorry.
like
I'm
Jinan.
sorry. I'm just so mad.
No, I mean,
No, you said it in a perfect tone.
yeah, that's
I'm with it.
Palestine has lifted the veil. This is the way that this is all of the things that have been lifted and brought to life. And there's not
and
many
this
notes
is and
for
this is
that.
something that so many of us are noting. Um, I have been extremely vociferous about and it actually is plastered right. It's pinned on my feed on X, Twitter, whatever, and that is we will not tolerate those sorts of discourses in the future that we've heard in the past. And even in the past, we were not accepting of them, we were critical of them. But right now, after this monstrosity, never again will we be able to tolerate this sort of discourse on democracy, on human rights, on violence. There has been so many remarkable, side by side portrayals of what was said about Ukraine. I mean, you could also go beyond Ukraine, but because they're both, contemporary and current processes, what was said about Ukraine by officials as well as scholars, which is the most disappointing, but by officials, not least Blinken, and what was said about Gaza, and the exact same principle that is upheld with utmost resolve is actually completely ignored when it comes to Gaza. So going forward, there's going to be a huge shift, not just in political discourse, in public discourse, but also in pedagogic discourse. And I think one of the things that I know that at least here, three of us are teachers at universities, and Jenan is a teacher at probably also even
On
an
the
even
world
wider.
level, globally,
Yeah, global teacher.
So there
reaches
is
more people than we could ever dream of reaching. Yeah.
this does explain the proactive stance which we're actually addressing, as many people listening, watching know, through various conversations about academic freedom. This is why there's a proactive stance to prevent this from taking place, to actually penalize and leverage the law, as we are seeing and we have been seeing, to criminalize the critique of Israel, something that is underway. And before it is underway, actually, even informally, and even though it's not legally binding, it's being used. I was also myself subject to conversations about this, and hundreds of others are conversations about the conflation of critique of the state of Israel's policies with critique with anti-Semitism. So yes, the veil has been lifted, but I think without serious action, and this is something that Jenan and I always try to end our conversations with in Gaza, ala Bali, Gaza on my mind, is some sort of call to action. We also have been working to provide links we will do this more um, properly next week, links to places where people can donate. We keep getting asked, I'm getting questions every time about where can people donate to support either education, food, delivery, or procurement, or anything regarding Gaza. So we will actually be more explicit and active on this next week. So any last words, Noura, Jinan, and of course our formidable guest Sherene.
Thank you.
لا مش رح يزبط هيك.
تفضلي نورا.
الصراحة كنت راح أقول إنه أنت اللي قلتيه كان هو ختام رائع.
Huh? That's what I said. And you challenged it. Allah لا يوفقك.
No, I just think, the idea of when we think about this moment, it's just like what Shireen was capturing, that this hypocrisy, this show of force, not lifts the veil, in the words of Jenan, and also signals the end of what, so many are reading as power. It's just the end of it, right? The apex of power, is its invisibility. And yet in this moment, it's so naked and top down. And I think it's the end. Obviously, I think it's the graveyard of Zionism as well. And Zionism, Israel may continue, but Zionism can't. Its morality is buried beneath that rubble, and this cruelty, sadistic cruelty. So yeah.
Jinan, تحب تقولي شيء؟ I know. Look, I follow you like everyone else does. You have something to say every day, so شو بدك تقولي لنا? What do you want to tell us at the end?
I mean, I loved what Noura said, the graveyard of Zionism. Such a beautiful thought. Um, I, I think everybody did an incredible job. This was such a wonderful conversation. Like you said, we try to give everyone a call to action before we end, and I think this week's call to action is to just find ways to support Palestinian life in general, so that we can continue to live it and teach others, as that quote goes. So whether that's, you know, if you want to figure out ways to counter the famine that has been forced onto Palestinians in Gaza, there are organizations that have been created on the ground by Palestinians. There's a really great one called Watermelon Relief. We can add the link to this if you'd like. They make sure to deliver food and water to Palestinians. There are others that are, they have soup kitchens that are focused on feeding the north, where starvation is most urgent. Find ways to support Palestinians in the West Bank. Find ways to support Palestinians and Palestinian life in diaspora, if it's supporting small businesses, if it's speaking with Palestinians in diaspora, if it's making sure that their emotional needs are met, so that we can continue the fight on our end. Whatever it is, just make sure that you are figuring out ways to support Palestinian life and not just fixated on bearing witness to our death and destruction.
Absolutely. Sherene, do we want to?
Okay, I think I'll end with a quote that's kept with a chant that the student organizers who have led us have really continues. I say it in my head, and I say it at night. I say it in the morning. I believe that we will win.
So,
Bassam, you got to accept it.
I mean, actually, I was hoping it was going to be more than 5 words. All right. The thing is, for some reason, I don't know if it's an algorithm, and we really don't care about algorithms here at ASI, Jadaliyya, Gaza in Context, Palestine in Context, the collaboration that produces these series and the teach-ins that we have been doing since October. We have had more than 70 events. So many of them are actually circulating, not just online, because everything circulates online, but also being shown um, quite extensively in classrooms. But so we don't care about algorithm, and that's why, if you notice, we've never until today we've had this channel for Jadaliyya, which is the sort of the point of inflection for many of these events. We've never actually had a subscribe button so far. We will. Long story. We've never actually asked people to subscribe, even vocally. We don't do that. We don't care about the algorithm. But the truth is that every single time we do the Gaza ala Bali, for some reason, within the first 55 minutes, right after, the numbers double. People just join in. So last week when we had, last week was an exception. We had a 3-hour run. Jenan, you're lucky you didn't. You would have killed me. But it was just so overwhelming. So in all cases, we will be satisfied with this. I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. Not Jenan, because Jenan her and I have to be here. Noura a bit more because she's a guest host, and Sherene for taking time out. I know that your schedule was such that this was like in between two things. So thank you so much. We will keep doing this thanks to Sherene, Naya, Noura, and Jinan. And next week,
And Tanaya.
oh yeah, and next week we will probably be addressing ethnic cleansing in particular, which is not something that goes with the theme of this week, but it is something that we will be addressing, and we will have We're planning to have invited and gotten some good responses from people outside the United States, including Europe, but most importantly in Gaza. And we hope that this holds given the precarious nature of people being able to sign on and so on. Jenan, shall we close? طيب.
Ready. Wallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Bonsoir.
Alaikum
Thank you
assalam.
all. See you all soon. Thanks for everybody who's tuning in and all the amazing comments we have been receiving. I'm sorry we cannot entertain a lot of the questions on all platforms, but thank you all so much. Yalla, bye.
You, bye.